On today's Transport Evolved, imprisoned LEAF drivers, the BMW i3's lack of SOC meter, dirty political tricks, and an unholy alliance. These and other stories coming up next on Transport Evolved. Transport Evolved is sponsored by audiblepodcast.com. To claim your free audiobook from a selection of over 85,000 growing titles for your iPod or MP3 player, head to www.audiblepodcast.com/Transport Evolved. And by your kind donations. To make a gift to the show or to set up a monthly subscription, head to www.transportevolved.com. We thank you for your kind support. And proud to support Chronovirus, the latest book by Long Island author Aaron Crocco. To find out more and get a free chapter, head to www.aaroncrocco.com. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to episode number 177 of Transport Evolved, recorded on Sunday, December 8th, 2013. My name is Nikki Gordon-Bloomfield.
And I'm Marc Chatterley. How are you today, Nikki?
I'm feeling bookish today, Marc.
Bookish. You say that as if I should know what that means.
You should know what it means, because I rang you up about half an hour ago and went, I'm feeling bookish today.
Yeah, and I still don't know. I haven't had time to Google it since then.
So you know, when you see those movies where there's this quiet little girl in the corner who reads the books and it's a really clever one. And
then she takes off her glasses and swooshes her hair off camera. And with you.
Because I happen to have my hair in a ponytail today, and I've got my glasses on, and I'm wearing the plaid shirt. So I'm feeling very bookish today. Very bookish today. Anyway, how about you? You had a week off, Marc.
I did. I had a week off where I wandered around Banbury and some randomly just nice places with nice churches. I went into a random house which they claimed was an antique shop, but was really someone's house where their collection had got completely out of control, but found some uranium glass. So, I now have radioactive glassware. So, that's good.
Did you just say uranium glass?
Yeah, uranium glass. They used to stain glass with uranium, and it gives it this kind of yellowish colour to it, but it makes it slightly radioactive. So at the moment, we're trying to figure out whether it's a gamma source or an alpha source, because those are the two types. Yeah.
Remind me not to come to your house this week. You also missed, Marc. You also missed the we got reddited. Reddited, yeah. And we had lots and lots of people viewing. So if you're watching now for the first time, hello, welcome to Transport Evolved. I'm the crazy woman who's been writing those weird stories all week. Marc is the crazy man who normally writes those stories too.
And wears banana jumpers.
He also does great comedy stuff with audiobooks that you should go and listen to. But enough about us, Marc. Let's go ahead and introduce our guests today. So coming up first, do you want to introduce our returning guest?
Okay, our returning guest is someone who joins us every now and then and brings a touch of science, I suppose, to what we do to make sure we're not talking rubbish. And it's Marc Geller from the US, who is in the I would call it on the committee for the EV Association in America, but I don't know if that's the official term you use over there. Do you use something more impressive, like on the board?
Well, I am on a board, but that's perfectly fine. Oops, wrong picture there. Yes, hi. Hello from San Francisco, on the board of Plug-in America and other nonprofits working for electric vehicle adoption.
Yep, and Marc's been driving. I like to think I've been driving EVs for a long time. I've been driving EVs since 2006. Mr. Geller has been driving EVs almost twice that length of time, haven't you, Marc? Even more?
Well, 2001.
Right.
Was when I first got into an EV, my beloved Think City, which is still on the road in Western Norway.
It went all the way over to Norway. Wow, that's incredible. And it's perfect because we've got our next guest on the show today is a Brit who is moving from Leicestershire all the way up to the Orkney Islands. So this is why he's got this slight kind of horror film look to him, because all his lights have disappeared. He runs a business called Eco Cars, and the idea is that it's kind of secondhand EVs and hybrids and LPG cars. And the concept is quite simple. It is that your average car dealer doesn't understand about these vehicles. And when they come in, when someone brings them in for a trade-in on a new vehicle, they might understand about the new vehicle, but they generally don't understand about the vehicle that's just been traded in. And so this gentleman helps essentially find new owners for those cars as they come in. Welcome to the show, Jonathan Porterfield. How are you, Jonathan?
Thank you, Nikki. I'm very well, thank you. Nice to be on.
Yes. And you actually, I must say, you look brighter on the actual screen here, on the outgoing stream than you do on my monitor screen, because I've got so many computers here. The screen that you're on is there, and you look kind of blue. And I think maybe that monitor's died. Would explain why you've got this cold blue tinge. But actually, on this monitor here, you actually look quite healthy and rosy and pink. So this is a good thing. I thought maybe for a while you were a zombie. No, you're not. That's good. You're moving to Orkney, which is a place that I love lots. Tell us about that.
I went up there in the summer and, to cut a long story short, stumbled across a council meeting that they were discussing EVs. And a mutual friend said, you really ought to go. So I went, and the people that were doing the presentation basically about My Electric Avenue and that government scheme, they know nothing about the Nissan Leaf, and they were talking lots of rubbish, to be honest. So when they were having questions fired at them for a good 20 minutes by members of the public, and they were floundering, I was invited up to do a 30-minute Q&A on electric vehicles and pros and cons and how you live with it and everything else. And that led on to me going back.
It is a lovely place. I went up to Orkney, it was August, I went up to Orkney, and I drove a Volvo V60 plug-in hybrid all week up there, and I loved it. Plugged in every day. Really good fuel economy. On the way up. Yeah, that's the first time we met, on the way up, which was kind of bizarre because you knew I was going up and you saw the car charging, and then you kind of sent me a message going, are you here? Yes, I was in fact there. Weird. I was just checking out of my hotel room. Marc Geller, we'd never believe that government officials or people supposedly trying to promote electric vehicles for sales purposes know nothing about electric cars, surely?
Yeah, well, it definitely, from whether it's a big city or an island somewhere, chances are we can bring a lot to the party in terms of what we understand about how these cars work and how to get people into them.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm afraid that for some reason, Marc is squished. Marc's image is squished quite imperceptibly, and I do not know why. He's just got a new webcam, and I think it's one of those posh ones that changes and tries to find the face. And so every now and again, I set it up before the show, and now it's moving around. So I'm not going to change Marc around because I suspect his shot will change again. So you're going to have to put up with thin Marc in one shot and fat Marc in another. I've met Mr. Geller personally, and I can tell you he's neither fat nor thin. He's just right. So there we go. Let's go on with the stories for the week. When we're starting with one that was a big news item for us here on Transport Evolved this week, the curious case of Cave Camus. He's a gentleman from Atlanta, Georgia, and he hit the headlines this week because he was arrested sometime at the end of November for plugging in his Nissan Leaf into a wall outlet at what he said was his son's middle school for 20 minutes to charge his car while he waited for his son to finish playing tennis. That was the story that went out on the news, wasn't it, Mr. Chatterley?
Yes, yeah. So there was definitely a playing the victim. I'm doing my bit to save the world, and the man is holding me down kind of story to what he was saying. That was the angle that was taken, I guess. But it slightly changed throughout the week. It was very interesting watching this develop, and as more and more information came out, we were found out that maybe that wasn't the whole of the story. I guess.
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, when he was interviewed by the local Atlanta news TV station, he was very much playing the victim card, and they spoke to the local police. They got a soundbite from the local police in which the police officer, the sergeant, said, "We would do this again. He was breaking the law. Blah blah blah. A theft is a theft." this was all over 5 cents of electricity, which is the amount of electricity on a 110 volt outlet that you would use in 20 minutes. But it later turns out in the week that this guy, it wasn't his son's middle school. He was the one there playing tennis, not his son.
Playing tennis when he shouldn't have been. It wasn't
when
as
he,
if it
when
was
he shouldn't have been. He was playing tennis on the school tennis courts. He was there with a friend, I think, and he'd had a previous run-in with the school administration who told him not to use the tennis courts. So this is a kind of a previous altercation, and the police officer who turned up said that Mr. Camoon had tried to blame him for damaging his Leaf, and there was, the cameras on his cop car obviously documented that wasn't the case, and he issued a statement saying that actually the man he apprehended and later put in jail for 15 hours was being a real jerk. He didn't use those words, but that was the basically the essence of what was going on here. Now, Marc Geller, I think most Brits here are sitting there going, we'd never dare do that. But Americans, I think, have a slightly different attitude to you don't ask for permission, you beg for forgiveness, right?
Well, I think there are both types, and I clearly Mr. Kamuna is of the sort who sees a plug and is quite happy to plug into it. I think what's unfortunate really is that this story is sort of emblematic of a lot of the problems, which could be resolved if we had a policy that just sort of said that on public property for the time being, a plug that someone might plug into and take 25 cents or $1 worth of electricity is not so important, considering what we're trying to do is get folks into electric cars. It costs more money to deal with Mr. Kamuna's offense than he could gather from electricity in a year, probably. And what you need is a policy from the top that says, this ain't no big deal, everybody. Let's just move on.
See, I slightly disagree with that because that line of arguing could be expanded out to anything that was worth less than, say, $20. So is it okay to steal a loaf of bread from the shop or a fizzy drink or a cake? Because the cost in dealing with that theft is hugely outweighed by the actual item you took. So I don't know, maybe that's just my personality, but I see very much of what he did was wrong. He was taking something he wasn't entitled to. And that seemed to play out in the rest of the story because he wasn't entitled to play tennis as well. So he was playing tennis on those courts because he didn't want to pay membership fees at his local club or something like that. So I don't have a lot of sympathy for him. What I don't like is the fact that it's made or could be seen to make EV owners look a bit like freeloaders. Yeah,
I would sit somewhere in the middle of you two, actually, and I think not doing that on purpose. I would argue that, okay, he did it once. If he did it once and he was, and it was a genuine mistake, I've turned up somewhere before and gone, oh, God, I really need to charge. I've plugged in and then gone and said, I hope you don't mind. I haven't turned it on yet, but I have plugged in. Is it okay? And if they say yes, then I'll turn it on, or I'll go and double check and then I'll plug in. But, I've been in a situation before, as we said in the article, where I've been at an airport or I was in a hospital a couple of weeks ago with my mum. And I pulled out, I plugged my laptop into the hospital wall outlet. Should I have been arrested for that? Because I was charging my laptop up on my phone while I was waiting for my mum to see the doctor. We've got to a point where we've got so used to electricity being this free thing that you get like water when you go into the doctor's surgery or when you go into, many shops will have a water dispenser if they think you're going to be there for a while. And it's very difficult, isn't it?
Okay.
I think it's not just the actual cost. I think it's also, particularly in some public places I've been in, it's the whole liability, such as the people in that particular office saying, well, do you know what? We can't be responsible for the equipment you're plugging in. You might damage our equipment or your equipment might catch fire. So there's that whole danger thing that these public bodies and huge organisations say, you can't do that because such and such might happen, which of course is a risk, but is a bit over the top.
Now, I know, Marc, you were just about to say something. the twist I'm now going to put on it is, I think had he done it once and then been told off, that would have been fine. I think it's the return offender aspect that I find leaves a sour taste in the mouth. Mr. Geller.
Oh, that part of it's very easy. I mean, if the reports are true, he sounds like a jerk. And so that's really, that's to that particular case. But the broader question, I certainly wasn't advocating stealing loaves of bread because they're only worth a couple of bucks. Here I'm talking about public institutions.
Yes.
Where at the moment, let me give the example in California, and I'm sure it's happening in the Orkney Islands and everywhere. We've got government contractors or employees who are being paid, reasonable salaries to figure out how to bring charging to the public, so that they are inspired to buy electric cars because it's a good public policy. And at the same time, other government officials are telling people who are actually solving the problem for themselves,
don't do it,
that no, they can't do it.
Yeah.
And is there a possibility of abuse? Of course. This isn't completely clear, but it's quite annoying to find folks who don't drive EVs and are on the government tip trying to solve the problem. While regular folks, including government employees, are being bound.
Well, let's and this kind of ties in nicely with the second story, which is in fact your story, Marc. You were driving recently in the Bay Area, and you met a police officer who had a Nissan Leaf. And let's pick up the story. You can tell it probably far better than I can.
Yeah, well, quite curiously, I was on my way. I had just driven back from Sacramento, where there was a meeting going on to figure out, to explain grants that the state of California was giving out to promote EV infrastructure. And I arrived at a new fast charger on one of the networks that exists in California in a rather confusing environment. But we got to chatting as I waited for him to finish up his quick charge. And he explained that he was there. He was a San Francisco police officer. I didn't know that because he wasn't in uniform, but he had just begun charging at these quick chargers after work to make it home to a location about 60 miles away because the new lieutenant in charge of the station was no longer letting him plug into the 120-volt outlet that he had found in the employee-only parking lot that is provided free of charge to the police officers who work there. And it just struck me as nuts that this cop whose problem was solved by sort of pre-existing legacy infrastructure, if you like, was now paying for charging, arriving home later than he would have otherwise, and that we ought to have policies that promote the simple and cheap. And certainly if government institutions are trying to solve the problem of how to bring charging to folks, kicking government employees off of a 120-volt outlet that's been checked for its, appropriateness to carry a kilowatt or so of current, it made me crazy. So I wrote about it in my blog at plugsincars.blogspot.com. And hopefully something will happen so that we're not in this odd position.
Now, I was actually looking on Facebook because there was a guy this week on Facebook who's got a Volt who was making a comment about one of his colleagues purposely trying to stop him from charging at work, i.e. purposely parking a trailer or a truck. They obviously it was a warehouse or some other building where they have big trucks coming in, and somebody is purposely parking a vehicle now. Ever since he started trying to charge there at work, someone is trying to stop that. Now, again, I'm going to be a bit of a devil's advocate here because I can imagine that somebody who doesn't understand EVs, who maybe drives, let's pick the most popular passenger vehicle of 2012, 2013, the Ford F-150 pickup. That thing has sold more vehicles. The F-150 has sold more than any other vehicle. It is that popular. And they, even if you have the V6 with EcoBoost, you're looking maybe at 20 miles per gallon if you're really clever.
Dizzy.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not, you're down into into the decimals or possibly even single digits, and your colleagues turned up at work in this brand new shiny car, which they're plugging in and they're getting fuel for free, and yet you're the one who's stuck, queuing for gas, and maybe they're on the same pay grade as you, and you're frustrated because you can't figure out how they can afford it, or there's that resentment, and so I can understand people wanting to step up and try and stop it from happening, but that's my sympathy over, because actually the reality of this is that we need better education, don't we, Mark? Which is exactly what you're saying. We need better education at the workplace level. We need better education at the city hall level. We need better education at the county-wide level. We need better education at the state or the country level. And, we have this problem too in the UK. There has been this ongoing challenge from EV drivers. And not so much the new drivers, but certainly the older drivers. And Mark, I think you and I fit into the older drivers now, because you've been driving since the Leaf first came out. But the idea of just give me a 16 amp socket, just give me a 16 amp wall outlet that I can plug my charging cable into and charge my Leaf. I don't care if you haven't got a, £2,500, $2,500 charging station. I just want power.
Just a simple way to access power. And I suppose going back to it is the public conception. They don't understand how cheap it is. They don't understand how little money people are talking about when they're charging at work. If you're charging at work, it's probably because you need to, which means you have just used over half your battery pack. So you're talking in the UK £1.50, in the US probably about $1.50, and all of the people that I've ever talked to who have an issue with that, who bring out the line of you're getting free fuel from work, that's not fair, are the same people who tend to be very, very happy when they've bought a new car and they can claim 40p a mile in mileage charge when they're on a company trip, but it only costs them 25p a mile to actually fill up the car. So it seems to be the same people who are proud to get money from a company for their fuel for free are the ones who don't like it when someone else is doing it. It's a very weird, interesting area, I think, that's going to have to be maybe not legislated against, but it's going to vary from employer to employer what's allowed and what isn't.
Jonathan, sorry, Mark.
True. Sorry, when I was in Orkney, so there was so much help from the council. They actually lent me some swipe cards. I went to the college that was the other side of the island at Stromness, and that had a different swipe card system, and they lent me one for the week. So in my pocket, I had 3 individual cards, which is another story, but that was there for me to use as often as I want. So I used the council car park as my base for my demos for the week. I even took the chair of the council out in a Leaf, and he was just bubbling over with enthusiasm. So there was no resentment or they didn't ask me for any money. Just real drive with the powers to be on the island to get EVs out there, which was really refreshing. And on a separate note, I sold a Leaf to a lady in Wales, and she worked for the local health authority. She was a district nurse, and it was just the health and safety aspect of her plugging the Leaf in during the day that the actual health authority were concerned about. There was no issue on the actual cost. So that was the only thing I experienced.
Let's tie this up with a nice neat bow. Marc Geller, what's the best way forward for this? Because this is becoming a phenomenon. I've heard this week of people in the UK and in the US who are complaining that colleagues are stopping them from plugging into standard wall outlets. And it's nothing, they may have gone and spoken to their line manager. They may have even spoken to the CEO of the blinking company and gone, can we plug in? And the answer has come back, yes. But people are still unplugging. Is this like the latest prank? Do we just have to grin and bear it? Or is there a solution? Is there a way forward?
Well, I think it calls for leadership. If there was some leadership from the top that acknowledged the value of what we call level 1 charging here in the States, in appropriate places, it would go a long way towards relieving employers or facilities managers who are concerned about giving away free power. And it would drive sales, which is what everyone is trying to do right now.
Right.
I mean, the fact is that that police station, there were officers who were ready to buy plug-in cars because they had just figured out the value proposition. And now, once it became much more complicated to charge, it changed everything.
And it put them off.
The economics.
It's very interesting because I suppose maybe we should do an article about this at some point, Marc, because my wife's client, she's not even a salaried member of staff. She's a contractor. She's been working there now for 1 year this Christmas. It will be her first year working for that company as a contractor. She gets very well paid. And as a perk of that, she's able to afford to buy something like a Chevy Volt. And, when she first started commuting, she took my Leaf because she didn't have a Volt, and she drove to and from work every day. And she stopped at a nearby rapid charger to charge up because she felt that if she'd asked to plug in there, it was going to cause some political problems. On the 1 or 2 days when something went wrong with the local rapid chargers, she actually ended up having to go in and beg for a charging spot. Now, this is where it gets interesting. She hadn't been seen charging. They'd just seen the car in the car park. And somebody had seen a Nissan Leaf in the car park. And when she went to the people who owned the building to ask, can I plug in somewhere? The response was, oh, it's you. We've been trying to track you down all week, all month. You're the one who drives the electric car. Sure, please plug in. Have you got an extension lead? If not, we've got one. Here you go. Plug into this. And every day she charged. And after about a week, she got an email going, yeah, we're going to put in 4 charging stations. And by the way, would you write a little introduction to why you're driving an electric car and send it round to all the people in this company? Wouldn't it be great if everybody who had a plug-in car could get treated that way? And I think that is we should laud companies and organisations who do that. I think that's the moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And if policymakers would realize what's happening in the real world to drive their ends. Unfortunately, often the policymakers don't drive plug-in cars, so they don't understand this quite the way the folks who are doing it understand it, and they should take their lead from what's happening on the ground.
Let's move forward. We've got another couple of quick stories before we come to our first ad break. Not to be outdone by Nissan, Volvo announced its own autonomous driving fleet this week. Unlike Nissan, which is just 1 car at the moment, Volvo is going to go for 100 cars in Gothenburg by 2017. The project's going to start next year with investigations into driver attitudes, how the cars are going to interact with normal humans, human-driven cars on the road, as opposed to the robotic cars, to develop the tech and everything else. Obviously, it gets quite cold in Gothenburg. Not as cold as it does further north in Sweden, but quite cold. It's Volvo's home city as well, I should note. And Volvo has said most of the cars to begin with will be petrol cars. Volvo's latest range of engines, the Drive-E engines, the Drive-E, and they're 4-cylinder engines. They have been developed specifically to be mated with electric motors, with the vision of having plug-in hybrid drivetrains, with the vision by 2020 of going 100% zero emissions. Question is, are they going to catch up Nissan? Are they going to catch up Tesla? Who's going to be first? Let's go round and ask each of us who's going to go first. Mr. Geller, who's going to be first in the market with a self-driving car? And do you want one?
No, I have no interest. You can go right on to somebody else.
Jonathan?
Self-driving cars. I think it's still a real macho bloke thing in particular to drive a vehicle, and the whole Top Gear thing and self-driving cars. I saw the advert for Volvo with a girl sort of reading a paper or making some notes, and then she sort of took over the car and started driving it. I don't know whether it's going to happen. There is quite a bit of joy still, I think, in physically driving a car.
Oh yeah, agreed.
Having the option there, I think some people would quite like if they've got other things to do.
Yeah, I mean, case in point, I had to go to London on Thursday to Nissan headquarters. They wanted to have a look at my car, and I took it up there for them to have a look at. And I took it up there, sort of 2.5 hours, 3 hours up there, 2.5, 3 hours back, and then when I got home, I then had to sit down and do a usual day's work. It'd be great if I could just tell my car to drive most of it for me and I'd be sat there typing me stories. that bit I'm interested in, but I am a proper petrol head, believe it or not. I do like cars for cars' sake, and I love driving, and I just love driving. However, I must admit, I'd rather have a self-driving car and then I had a motorbike that I could go out and have fun on. That would be a good solution for me. Mr. Chatterley.
I think Volvo will probably push it and pursue it because they were into these they were the
Safety,
first with airbags and 3-point seat belts and all the rest of it. So I think they will always be pushing back the sort of whole safety technology as a company.
Absolutely. Marc, Chatterley.
I think self-driving cars are going to be a big thing. I mainly because I totally agree that people drive for fun, and people do drive for fun, but a lot of people drive to work because they have to in the morning when they're tired and they'd rather not. And I think there's a definite market, and I think the majority of driving will become self-driving eventually. I think Nissan will be first out, very, very quickly, then followed by Tesla. The reason I don't think Tesla's going to come out first is because they've got so many other things to get going. The Model X, the Model E, the second affordable car they've said they're going to do, the new Roadster they've said they're going to do. And then Elon's also got SpaceX and all the other things.
All these other things.
I don't think they're going to be pushing this, but I think Nissan will, and then very quickly other people are going to follow suit with different technologies.
The reason why I'm laughing is because my 11-year-old son yesterday, trying to be hip and cool, went, oh, is that another Tesla Model? Oh, God. Oh, that's so boring. It's so old. Time they made the E already. Come on, Tesla, which I just thought was brilliant. I have to say, I mean, I think, there are some challenges, but I think eventually we'll get there. And I think, Marc, now is a good time for us to announce our piece of news relating to self-driving cars, don't you?
Yes, I think you should do it because I've only had a brain dump on it.
So the brain dump, I gave Marc a brain dump. He found out about this on Friday, bless him. We are at Transport Evolved going to start covering autonomous cars as well. Autonomous cars that may or may not be electric, and I think that's an important thing to note. The reason why is because autonomous drive technology can help you save fuel anyway. That is not a move away from electric cars from us. We are considering a separate podcast just focusing on autonomous technology and safety aspects. That will come under the Transport Evolved because it is an evolved version of transport as we know it at the moment. How did I do, Marc? Was that good?
That sounds very good.
So moving on to the final story of this section, and this is a really quick one. Bitcoin was used to pay for a Tesla Model S this week. Someone
like the geekiest story
Florida. Ever. I know. I woke up at 4 a.m. yesterday morning and typed this up because it was so exciting. Someone paid 91.4 Bitcoins for the Tesla Model S, which at the time was worth $106,000 from a Lamborghini showroom, a used Lamborghini showroom. So, Jonathan, my question to you is, when are you going to start accepting Bitcoins?
When the moon's made of cheese or I see several pigs flying outside.
Okay, fair enough. But it must be said that the side of that I haven't told you so yet. Oh, by the way, we accept Bitcoin donations. So if you want to pay us, you want to donate to us with Bitcoins, please do. We'd love them.
Especially if you've got a load hanging around from when they were like $1 each, and you're now a Bitcoin millionaire.
You've got too many Bitcoins. Should have been. Yes. Apparently, there was somebody in the UK who had a computer full of Bitcoins, a hard drive, and they threw it away. And it's now in a landfill somewhere.
They had 1,000 Bitcoins.
1,000 Bitcoins, which by today's standard would be $70,000. And
much more than that, 700,000.
700,000, yeah, 700,000. Sorry, missed off a zero. Now it must be said that when that Tesla was sold, it was $106,000, which was 94.1 Bitcoins. But now that would have only been about $65,000. So, you do have to. It's like playing the stock market or playing roulette. It's a game of chance. Let's go and talk to Mr. Aaron Crocco. He will tell us about coronavirus.
It was supposed to be just another cargo run, But for Ken Mallory and the 3-person crew of the Raven, an anomaly in deep space changes everything. An unexpected turbulence shakes the small ship like never before, allowing a deadly virus aboard. One by one, the infected crew is thrown back in time to relive a near-death experience. Only this time, death may be closer than they remember. My short story Chronovirus is available for Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble Nook, Kobo, iBooks, Sony, and for all other devices and e-readers through Smashwords. Learn more about Chronovirus by visiting my website at www.aaroncrocco.com.
Now also available as a very, very good audiobook through my good friend Mr. Marc Chatterley and In-Ear Entertainment. Go there now and buy both! We are having a lovely time here. We've got the wonderful Mr. Mark Geller all the way over from San Francisco. Well, he's not over here. He's, doing it through the internet.
Our budget's not quite there.
And Mr. Jonathan Porterfield from ecocars.net, who sells used EVs and other green cars, who is just about to move, hence the slightly bizarre setup he's got there, and very, very sort of, it looks almost like you're set up in one of these, like a government sting operation, and there's you bought one of those houses that you're just occupying partly at the moment. I'm watching Homeland at the moment, okay, and it has a lot of that in it, so which is kind of a spooky thing. And of course the wonderful Mr. Marc Chatterley as always. The Tesla Model S is safe, says the Kraftfahrtbundesamt. Did I say that right? Does anybody speak German?
Sorry,
it's good enough for me.
Mark, you wouldn't.
Sounds good. I don't speak German.
Sound. I convinced everybody. Then this is effectively a federal motor safety authority in Germany. They have looked into the Tesla Model S fires that occurred during the month of November and said no. Tesla's not to blame. The design is fine. There's nothing to blame Tesla for, and therefore we're going to close the investigation.
Surely what is to blame is the state of the US highways, where big hunks of metal can just sit on the road. That surely is something that should be being looked into too.
Yes, that's what I would argue. Mr. Geller, you're the only American on, so take it away.
Yeah, well, I'm not surprised that they found this, and I think that the real issue is clearly, as regards car fires, are the fires that occur constantly in regular gas cars. And I think the accident with that actor the other day, we don't know to what extent the explosion that followed and the fire that followed would have been very different and much lessened in an electric car, and we accept hundreds of thousands of car fires that kill lots of people every year.
Yeah, agreed. So the NHSTA, which hasn't concluded its investigations, wrote to Tesla this week an official letter saying you have until I think it's the 25th of January, from memory, to provide us with the following information. And there's a huge list of, things like, the details of every car they've made, their customer details, any issues they've had in the past reported with any faults or complaints that may be related to these fires, any design implementations, any conversations they've had about the fact it may not be safe or it is safe, any of that, the NHSTA has said you have to provide. Tesla will provide that hopefully by the 24th or 25th of January. If it doesn't, it's going to get a huge fine. But the fact that it's already provided a lot of that information to the Kraftfahrtbundesamt means that obviously it shouldn't be an issue. So, let's move on to the next story. This one drives me up the wall. If you watched TEN this week, you'll hear me say, if you've ever watched Simpsons episode 14, season 14, episode 14, which I think is called Mr. Schmaltz Goes to Washington. I think that's the title. It's Krusty the Clown goes to Washington to try and help the Simpsons divert airplanes away from their house. And the only way that they can get this bill put through the Congress is to attach this bill changing the flight path of the airplanes away from the Simpsons' house on the bottom of another bill. A much more popular, a much more supported bill. Now, watching this from a distance, Mark, you and I, and Jonathan, this is completely alien to us. I don't think this happens in the UK. I'm going to be shocked and surprised and disappointed if it does. But sorry,
it does happen in the UK.
It does happen in the UK. It's happened in the US a lot lately because of the kind of the blocking movement from the far right. And what you very often see is there was a very famous incident recently of anti-abortion legislation, which was tagged onto the bottom of a bill for motorcycle safety. Am I right with that, Marc Geller?
I don't recall the motorcycle safety abortion bill, but certainly it is part of the way the legislative process here works. And it's been used for things that are good as well as for things that are bad. Everyone's trying to stick in stuff. And in this case, it's a different story, really. It's about the power of the
auto
dealers and the dealer networks. And of course, that is a historical reason that developed. But, we are in a different time now, and we have different ways of doing business. And logic suggests that a car company that can develop a model such as Tesla's for selling cars and has the trust of the buying public shouldn't have unreasonable obstacles put in its way.
Well, this story revolves around Ohio, where the dealers associations have lobbied the Ohio legislators to tack on an amendment to a bill designed to make road safety, to improve the road safety of the men and women who maintain Ohio's highways. And essentially this bill, Senate Bill 137, was designed to make it mandatory that if you're driving down the highway and you see a maintenance truck parked up at the side of the road with its lights on and people working on that highway, you are mandatorily required to pass them on the left and leave at least one lane between your car and their truck. This is obviously to try and limit injury and death in that situation. But at the very bottom of the bill, tapped on, was an amendment that said that you can't register a car in Ohio if you've been sold it by a dealer, by a manufacturer, and it was essentially stop any automaker from selling direct to customers in the state. Luckily, this was done at the very last minute in a quite sneaky way. Luckily, Tesla was on top of it. Luckily, Tesla's fans are on top of it, and luckily, the people in the Ohio Senate were on top of it. It was discussed on Tuesday, I think it was, Tuesday or Wednesday, and then it was thrown out. The amendment was thrown out, but the actual bill passed. So the original bill passed without the amendment. This is not going to be the last time this happens, though, is it, guys?
Unfortunately, it's a fairly common tactic in politics nowadays. And like I said, it does happen in the UK. I think because in the UK, our bills tend to come from one of the departments. So you couldn't attach something to do with electric cars to a bill that's got something to do with health. It wouldn't work that way, which I think is slightly different in America, where there's more freedom to do that. And unfortunately, it's one of those political techniques that people use to stop whole bills being passed by attaching an amendment that people don't like. And I don't know where I stand, because I do know where I stand. I think it's atrocious, but it's part of modern politics, and I don't think there's anything we can do to stop it. We just need to be quite vigilant to make sure that none of these slip through without us noticing.
Now, Jonathan, in the UK, there's no law, is there, preventing this from happening? You can sell cars directly to consumers if you're an automaker.
Yes, you can. Yes.
And I mean, do you see what the dealers are trying to do?
The automakers just love the dealer network and the whole franchise setup, because there's always a payback and customer loyalty, etc. So there is that endemic franchise type dealer network that exists here, but it's not quite as strong as it is in America. I agree with what you said. It's very sneaky. I don't understand American politics, but it's very sneaky of the government over there to try and do that. And hats off to Tesla, who are really booking the trend.
Now, it must be said, how Tesla did this. I don't know if you knew this, Marc Geller. How Tesla, one of the reasons that this was cast out, I am sure, let's put it like that, was that Tesla went to the Ohio Senate building on Monday afternoon and gave all the Ohio senators a free ride in a Tesla Model S. Which I think is the best weapon that they could do. Now, there is some concern, I think, from a lot of people that this could be viewed as an antitrust kind of thing, that they might get into trouble because they're influencing. But then this is essentially they're lobbying with the car rather than with money, right? I mean, isn't that a bit more of an honest way of doing it?
Yeah, I mean, this isn't the first time they've had to do this. It happened in New York. Perhaps not exactly the same legislative mechanism, but the issue has arisen in a number of places, certainly in Texas. It's an ongoing problem. And it's just we've got a very federal system, and you've got lots of places you can, if you've got money, try and get your way. And in this case, the auto dealers certainly are a big enough collection of folks that they can try and influence legislation. I think that between Tesla and the EV organizations that have long mobilized to respond to these sorts of issues. Perhaps our emails aren't as powerful as a ride in a Tesla Model S, but ultimately it's not clear that they'll be everywhere to ensure that these sorts of bills aren't passed. But we will be.
And as all of the people who commented to this story on Reddit, because this is the one that nearly brought our website down this week. Actually, no, it wasn't. It was, and I wanted just a hat tip to Amazon, because we're hosted on Amazon, and Michael Thwaite, who set up our new server. Thank you, Michael, because we were watching. I was sitting there in bed watching the hits come in, and the numbers that came through Transport Evolved's website on Tuesday were phenomenal, because we were the first people to break this story, and it was just a really nice feeling to have the website working. So thank you, Michael, for that. But then a lot of the people who were commenting on this said, this is simple. We just need to find out who proposed this bill in the amendment in the first place, and make sure that they don't come back into, they don't get revoted back in. So, that's a very simple thing. As you say, Mark, you vote. You use your voting power as a weapon if you need to. GM has cancelled its deal with Envia this week. Now, this is the battery company that promised to have a really big breakthrough in terms of energy density, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's not GM, but Envia's been in a bit of a naughty, bit on the naughty step, I think is probably the best way of describing this. They have been accused of stealing intellectual property. Right, Mark Geller?
That's my understanding. It's a nice little corporate fight. I have no idea about any of the principles in the matter. I don't know anything about the chemistry of the matter. Any promise to make radical improvements in battery technology always both perks my interest and raises my doubts.
Yeah, I mean,
so I have no idea what's going on. Maybe GM was snookered. They've certainly made a bad investment before, and God knows, I'm sure we wouldn't have to dig too long to figure out where they put their money in the wrong place.
Well, $17 million in January 2011, some more since then, I believe. But they're talking, this is the company that claimed it could have a real world range of about 300 miles. Now, the interesting thing is, and I don't know if this is connected, because obviously Dan Akerson of GM CEO, munch my words there, has said in the past that, we are bringing a 300-mile EV to market. We will bring in a 300-mile EV to market. And I'm questioning now whether that will still be the case if, in fact, it was based on this battery technology. Now, wouldn't that be the perfect fingers up for the first-gen EV drivers who remember what happened to the nickel metal hydride battery packs in the EV1 and the RAV4 EV and all of those cars, Mark? Because that one comes off patent soon, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, there's been comments about the fact that comes off patents, and there have been some folks trying to see if there aren't some old nickel metal hydride battery packs buried in Toyota. But I suspect, and obviously a scientist, a chemist would need to comment, a battery engineer would need to comment on whether there's any particular value in looking backwards towards the nickel metal hydride packs that certainly had some benefits, some really obvious benefits in terms of their longevity and robustness over time, seemingly compared to some of the lithium batteries. But the work is being done on lithium, and I'll just trust that lithium is the right place to be looking for car chemistries at the moment.
Yep, sensible move. And let's hope that this doesn't cause any bad problems, any bad repercussions in the electric vehicle world. Battery technology is developing so quickly. I'm sure it's not going to cause problems because there's so many different companies working on battery technology right now. I'm sure we will, the industry will recover from this if indeed this was stolen technology. I'm sure that someone will eventually pay for it, etc., etc. So I don't think we need to worry about that. Let's talk sales. Now, I think this is also a good point for us to note. In Transport Evolved, on the website, on the news site, we don't do sales reports. You may have noticed this, and there's a bloody good reason for that. It is because our friends, and I do consider them friends at all the other websites, Green Car Reports, Plug-in Cars, Autoblog Green, they all do sales analysis. We don't need to do it because they all do it. And they, they do it very quickly. They get it out. And frankly, I know that sounds a bit bizarre, but I'm not interested in the sales figures of EVs because I can see that they're going up. I'm interested in the trend. It's an upward trend. But sitting there and bean counting and trying to figure out how many cars sold more than another is kind of a bit of a moot point now. I'm more interested in the general trend towards plugging people in than bean counting individual cars. But the trend is moving upwards. Now, it slumped a bit in September after a very, very positive month in August, which is the highest sales figures in the US in August. And it's now sort of creeping back up, which is unusual because this is time of year people don't normally buy cars. They're saving for Christmas, etc., etc. So here's my prediction. I think EV and plug-in hybrid sales are going to go up in November and December because that's when you put your tax return in. You've got to get your tax return in, haven't you, Mark, in the beginning of January?
End of January, yeah.
So
don't remind me.
So this is the point at which in the US that you have to get, if you're looking to buy an EV and you want your tax rebate, you don't want to buy the car in January and then wait for 12 months to claim your rebate. Right, Mark Geller?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a slight added incentive this year, which is that the tax credit for EV infrastructure that for so long we've had for the past few years, up to 30%, will disappear on December 31st. In the past, we got it renewed at least at some point along the way. Congress is so hopeless at this point that I don't think we expect anything like that. So to the extent that you're going to invest in, say, a level 2 charging station along with your purchase, and that might cost you some money to do the upgrade, it might behoove you to do it before December 31st, get the 30% on that expenditure and installation cost.
Yep, and I think it's an upward trend that we're going to see continue. I think next year we're going to see EVs moving on. I think the Leaf, the price drops that the Leaf's had in the US this year, and the Volt, and pretty much every other EV. The only company I can't think of there being a massive price drop on has been the Model S. In fact, I think that's probably gone up a little bit. But when you're thinking about buying $80,000 worth of electric car, you probably are less concerned about the price than and that's not to imply that people who buy Model S's have bucket loads of money, because I know a lot of people who've bought Model S's are enthusiasts who've scrimped and saved and scrimped and gone without holidays and everything else just so they can have a Model S. But I think for your everyday person in the street, the prices of cars, the average price I think in the US is about 20 to 25,000 for a new car, and used car prices are about 10. Jonathan, even in the UK, price is so important, isn't it?
It is. It is the main incentive for people seriously considering an EV. There is a proportion of my customers that have been real eco warriors that have wanted to do their bit, but I have to say, I'd say 95% of people just want to do it to save money.
Yeah.
And since other aspects like the congestion charge, cost of fuel, all of that rolled together forces people to pick the phone up, talk to me or talk to other dealers and make that decision. And since July the 1st this year, when the congestion charge rules officially changed for London, I've seen a marked improvement, a marked rise in requests for details about EVs. So much so that I'm no longer going to stock LPG vehicles. It's just going to be hybrids or EVs.
That's great news. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's a bit of a scoop for us. Well, thank you for announcing that. Over in mainland Europe, EV sales in the Netherlands and Norway are doing really, really well. Norway accounted for 12% of car sales.
Amazing.
It's amazing. I put Netherlands in the show notes, but it's actually Norway, so apologies there. 12% of EV sales. It wasn't a high figure in terms of the number of cars sold because there are not that many people living in Norway. But
still a high proportion.
It's still a high proportion, and we've got to get that up. And the only way of doing that is incentives and sticks and carrots.
And you say it's a smaller population, but even in somewhere like California, which again is a small population, I don't think they're anywhere near 12% of total car sales being zero emissions, are they? So regardless of the fact that it's a small population, it's still amazing.
I think, and this is an article that I think I've asked Marc to do because Marc likes his maths and his statistics. This week, I'm hoping that Marc's actually going to sit down and analyse sales figures and figure out which country has the per capita largest EV adoption, because I've got a suspicion it ain't the US.
Oh, it's Norway.
It's Norway, but you know, of UK and the US, who because you know we've only got 60 million in the UK. So
yeah.
So you know it'd be interesting to see as a percentage of sales what's going on. Final story of the segment before we go on to our Audible ad. Porsche announced last week that the Panamera plug-in hybrid is going to be, not only is it going to qualify for the London congestion charge exemption, but it's also going to be eligible for a £5,000 plug-in car grant from the UK government. It only has 20 miles of all-electric range. Its fuel economy is not that great when the engines, you know, obviously when the batteries run flat. I think it's a V6 engine, if I remember correctly. Is it time that we, as an industry, or is it too early for us to start going, I'm sorry, that car it's not really a plug-in car. Come on. It's you know, there's a long list of cars that I would add to that. I would let the plug-in Prius from Toyota in because it is such an efficient car when it's running its gasoline engine compared to the rest of the compared to the rest of the hybrid cars out there. If it can get 60, 70 miles per gallon consistently, for now, fine. But cars that genuinely do not get, you know, 30, 40, 50 miles per gallon, I think what we need to do is start turning around and going, you know what? That's not fair, especially not if it's high priced. And so the two questions I've got and what I want to discuss, you know, in the next couple of minutes is, should we start segregating plug-in cars based on their emissions and their range in terms of government incentives? And should we start calling companies out who produce, they're not compliance cars, I don't think compliance car does it justice. It's almost token cars, token plugins. I'm going to start with Marc Geller.
It's very complicated. You know, I mean, I think I strongly feel if it's got a plug on it at this point in time, it's doing the right thing. And certainly the plug-in Prius, it doesn't even get anywhere near 20 miles in terms of all electric range. It's hard to know what the parameters ought to be to get the benefits of government incentives, because it is certainly moving in the right direction. If lots of Porsche owners should move to get a car like this that has some way of using grid electricity, and there's no way of measuring at this point the relative benefits of the different sorts of implementations of plug-in hybrid technology.
Maybe the solution, and you know, people are going, you'd put the plug-in Prius in it, he's got 12 miles of range, 11 miles of range. I would put it in if I could absolutely categorically prove that the person doing it was using plug-in most of the time. And I think maybe this is the point at which we need to say, okay, we need to move away from our current taxation. We need to move away from our current situation and actually prove. Maybe what we need to do is say, okay, you buy this car and, you know, if you prove that you are actually using the electricity side of it and you're not using the petrol side of it very much, then maybe we'll give you a better incentive at the end of the year on your registration or some other way. The UK, we're just about to ditch tax discs, which has thrown me in a massive hoop because I like having my little tax disc on my window because I know what my tax disc status is. Now it's moving to digital, which means I suspect they're just going to use cameras on the motorway to see if your car's taxed or not. And having been driving once down the motorway, when a cop pulled us over because they believed our car was not taxed when it was a very unpleasant experience. Even though there was a tax disc, their computer said we weren't taxed, and they believed their computer more than they believed us. So I think that's going to cause some problems. But I think we are in a situation where we need to say, yes, a plug is good, but please don't take the piss.
I think I've got sort of 2 points on this. My first is that I think any vehicle should be eligible for the grant if by having a plug on it, it has made the vehicle cleaner. Because I can see situations where putting a plug on it means stuffing in an electric motor and batteries, which has meant a smaller engine has been put in, which won't necessarily make the car cleaner. In the same way that the Prius, upgraded its engine size because they found a lot of people drove the Prius on the motorway, and having a larger engine on the motorway made it cleaner because it could run at a lower thing. So I can see cases where people are putting a plug into a car could actually make it worse for the environment. So then it shouldn't be eligible. So as long as the plug makes it greener, then yes. But I also think in the UK, our £5,000 grant is it's up to 25% of the vehicle cost, capped at £5,000. In the same, so that's why the Twizy doesn't get the whole grant; it only gets a part of the £5,000.
Doesn't get anything.
Does it not get anything? Or there are smaller cars that get a smaller amount.
The Smart for Two.
Smart for Two, and I think that should happen at the other end too. I think there should be a range once you're above, say, £50,000 on a car's price. You then start getting a fraction as it goes down. So it's a kind of a curve,
a bell curve, essentially.
Yeah. And I think that would make it fairer, because then you're not giving too much money away to these smaller cars, and you're not giving too much money away to these massive luxury cars.
And this ties in, with charging station use as well. It's proven that Volt drivers plug in more and use more electric miles, and they drive further in all electric mode than maybe someone who has a Leaf and doesn't go as far in it because they don't know where they're going to be able to charge. And but at the same time, you've got cars like the P1, the McLaren P1. It plugs in. The Porsche 918 Spider, it plugs in. What's the point? What's the problem? It plugs in, mate. It's a green car. No, it's not.
Do you not think that's what these manufacturers like Porsche are doing, is just to put that whole green slant on their product range? So it's sort of like a compliance car for PR as well as
it's to do with the labs. It's got nothing to do with anything but the labs. If in the lab the car gets 20 miles per gallon, they get absolutely hammered on the VED, the taxing of the vehicle. If in the lab they can prove that actually under ideal conditions, this car will go 25 miles in all electric range. And by the way, they do that. They calculate range of EVs, certainly in the UK. I don't know about the US, but the tests that they do in Europe to test an EV's range are based on about 15 minutes of rolling road tests using very, very unrealistic driving simulations.
No wind, no rain.
No wind, no rain, no heater, no nothing else. Based on a driving pattern and a driving style that would have suited a car older than me. So I think that's, so I don't know. Anyway, let's move on to our audible ad break, Mr. Chatterley.
Excellent. I will do an audible ad break. I'm just
you're stalling
while I type some figures in. There we go. Audible is a online system owned by Amazon that allows you to get audiobooks, and audiobooks aren't what you imagine they are. I think that's fair to say. If you're thinking audiobooks are basically the next step on from large print books, you're completely wrong. Audiobooks are the only part of the publishing industry that's growing at the moment. They are so much fun. They allow you to read books when you wouldn't be able to read books before. So when you're commuting, when you're exercising, when you're doing the dishes. I was listening to one today while washing my car and mowing the lawn, which was really good because you can't usually read books. Then they either get wet or get caught in the mower and make a big mess. Audible has a bajillion different audiobooks, from autobiographies and biographies of your favorite stars and writers and fans, all the way to science fiction, non-fiction, children's books, and even factual books, which is amazing. They're not my thing, but you can listen to them. You sign up, you pay a monthly subscription, and that monthly subscription gives you a number of credits, and then you spend those credits on audiobooks. And if you go to audiblepodcast.com/transport evolved, you can sign up. You'll get a month for free, which is one free audiobook. And even if you decide not to take that forward and you just click a button that says cancel, it's really nice and simple. You get to keep that audiobook, and we get a little bit of money for sending you their way. And we think they're wonderful. We've pretty much all got a subscription, I think, in the Transport Evolved team now.
Yes.
And Nikki has a recommendation for this week.
Yes, I do. It is called Seventh Sigma, and it's by our good friend Mr. Stephen Gould, who you may know. We've included him on the show before. And this is a really interesting story. It's kind of like a post-apocalyptic future in which the Midwest is a very strange place. The Midwest has what's called bugs, and these bugs turned up about 50 years ago, and they are silicon bugs. They are intelligent. They can replicate. They are essentially machines, and their job is to eat metal. They were originally designed to help mining operations, but got out and escaped, and now they are devouring everything that is metal. And so the Southwest has turned into this almost, as I say, post-apocalyptic Wild West again. And, you know, people have to have, there's no electronics, there's no metal, there's no cars, there's nothing made of metal. Everything's made of synthetics or composites or natural fibers. And it's a wonderful story. I'm halfway through it at the moment. And it kind of mashes that with the world of Japanese martial arts. Let's have a quick listen.
When the student is ready, a teacher will come. High atop the Exodus Memorial in the plaza of Nuevo Santa Fe, Kimball paced back and forth, his hand raised to strike down the impudent. The memorial had nothing to do with the early events of Judeo-Christian tradition, but there were several scriptural references on the ceramic tiles inset in the thick adobe wall, and young Orville, whose father was the local LDS bishop, and young Martin, whose eldest brother was a deacon at the Church of Christ the Rock, argued from below that these affiliations entitled them to the place occupied by Kimball, an avowed apostate and frequent blasphemer.
There you go. It's a really good book. I do suggest you give it a go. Seventh Sigma by Stephen Gould. Okay, so we're moving on with our final selection of the stories for today. We have Mr. Tom Mologney in the chat room, and I'm very happy about that because he will put us correct if we screw this next story up. This is one from BMW. The BMW i3, Tom Mologney broke this week, will not have an SOC gauge, a state of charge gauge on it, as standard in the US. In Europe, it will, but only in the range extended version, and it will be hidden away in a little menu somewhere so that you can turn your engine on and off. Now, the reason why the US version of this car doesn't have it is because of California. In California, you will not be able to turn the REX on, the range extending engine, until your battery pack has dropped below a certain amount. Is that correct, Marc?
That's my understanding. There certainly are some CARB regulations that it had to meet, the California Air Resources Board regulations that it had to meet in order to get all of the credits that they want to get with the car. I mean, part of the problem, and we were referring to it in the previous segment, is that, you know, there's system gaming. I mean, it's gaming if you want. I mean, you write a reg and then, you know, the company's going to determine what it can do in its product line to meet the regs. And so this is one of those kinds of cases. I must say, in general, the lack of an SOC gauge strikes me as complete insanity. And it's also the kind of, from company to company, they ignore the experience of the drivers with whom they have some contact. And it certainly was true of Nissan, the first generation Leaf had no state of charge meter. Many of the cars don't, and it's quite obvious that they got feedback from the folks at who were driving the BMW electric cars
Yep.
that they wanted a state of charge meter. I don't understand the automaker reaction at all.
I'm getting a correction from the chat room. So thank you, Tom. He said yes, it does have a state of charge gauge, but it's not a state of charge gauge with a numerical representation. So it's not a percentage bar. It's not a percentage state of charge. It's a bar graph, like the Leaf, the first generation Leaf, like so many other EVs. So it's got a segmented bar graph and it slowly ticks down. But that's not a very tangible thing for people to know when they're driving. When I'm driving a car, if I've got a percentage, I've got 1 out of 100 resolution. I've got 100 different positions it could be in. I know exactly how far that car can travel based on that. And what I do, this is what I do when I get in my Leaf and I'm doing a long distance trip. Now, I don't have a Leaf with a state of charge meter, but I'm running a very, very fantastic app called, it's called Leaf Spy Pro.
Leaf Spy.
Yeah, you can run that on an Android tablet or an Android phone. I don't have an Android phone. I've got a Kindle, and I hacked my Kindle so it will run it. And I sit that down only when I'm doing a long distance trip. I don't normally carry it, but when I'm doing a long distance trip, I'll reset my odometer my trip meter when I get in the car, and I will watch how far I travel based on how many percentage I've dropped, and then I can calculate very easily how far I can really travel. I know if my percentages drop too quickly, I have to slow down. I know if my percentage is lolling along nice and slowly, maybe I can turn the heater up, maybe I can go a bit faster, and it really helps me drive. Now, what the BMW i3 has is it's got a miles till empty display, which BMW says is so accurate you'll never need anything else. Marc Chatterley.
I don't know. Is the US flatter than the UK? I did my trip when I went on holiday. I drove from my house to just outside Banbury, which is about 65 miles, and lots of hills. It was up and down all the way. And the gasometer is pretty much useless until you've gone most of that journey, because at that point it then realizes there's lots of up and downs, and I'm guessing it factors them in or out quite cleverly. So after a while it becomes useful, but for the first part of the journey it's useless. And that's the problem with these gasometers, is that unless you've plotted a course that you're following on a sat nav and it knows elevation profiles, and it knows what the wind's doing, and there are ways you could make it
temperatures,
work.
how heavy the car is. I mean, again,
there's too many variables.
Tom's giving us some more feedback, and he's saying the car will know the topography. It will be able to take that into consideration. It will be able to predict that based on how many hills you've got to climb. But as he said in his blog post, it won't know how many people are on board. It won't know how full the trunk is. It won't know, it might not know every tiny little thing about headwind, etc.
Surely with the topography, it needs to know where you're going. So you'd have to have the sat nav set. You couldn't just set out and drive, because it doesn't know if you're going to go up the hill and then down the other side, or up the hill and then off to the right and stay at that level. So that's only useful if you've got a plotted journey. And correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't the Active E and the Mini E both have state of charge percentage? So BMW have decided to go against one of the things that a lot of the EV community were pointing at their cars going, they're doing it right. And they've decided to take it away.
Now, Tom has said there is hope. He said, BMW are going to get it in the neck from drivers of its Active E and Mini E programs until it puts it in, probably. But BMW could, if it wanted to, because the car already knows what the state of charge is. It's just a case of a new piece of software. It's not like
that was true for Nissan as well. I mean, we told Nissan before the car came out that it should have an SOC meter, by which I'm saying a numeric, preferably to the 10th, by the way. And eventually, 2 years later, they came out with one that was not to the 10th, but at least was an SOC meter. And of course, the information is in the car. If you get a third-party app for the Nissan Leaf, including Leaf Spy, they're not calculating some sort of what the SOC is. They're pulling it off of the information, the diagnostic provided by the car. So it's a decision of a different sort based on their analysis of the psychology of driving the car. And for some reason, these car companies all refuse to believe the drivers who initially drive their products because they think they are self-selected for nerdiness or geekiness, or they are off the edge of the bell curve, and thus whatever feedback we get from them can be ignored when we decide for other reasons that we want to go in a different direction.
Now, this is an interesting question, Jonathan. Do first-time drivers, people who've never driven an EV before, now you're sitting here now with 3 EV drivers. We've all been driving for significant periods of time. Yeah. Do you think first-time buyers want to know percentage, or do you think they just want to know that they can get to their destination?
Exactly. They just want to know, how far can I get? They turn into nerdy types. They turn into people like us, and they like all the ins and outs and all the nuances of temperature and wind direction and topography. That comes later. But the initial new EV driver just wants to know, can I get to Aunt Flo's, who lives 50 miles away? And I just give them a basic, this is how far you'll get, roughly, with the heater on, with the heater off. And that's as much as they want at that time. And that is enough to help them to commit to buy. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's move on to our next story, which is the Mitsubishi i-MiEV dropped in price more than $6,000 for 2014. This is fantastic. This drops the car down to $22,995, I think, off the top of my head, before incentives. Or is it after incentives? Now I'm going to have to go and check. I sounded like I got it in my head, and I got it right. $22,995 before incentives. That's phenomenal, isn't it, Marc? Do you think people are going to go for it in the US?
Oh, I wish they would. I still have a great soft spot for the car, and I certainly know folks who have access to multiple cars in fleets. For example, in Point Reyes, places like that, they've had access to a number of electric cars, and they love the car. It's a really useful car, and there's a price at which it is going to be purchased by folks. But the differential between it and a Leaf, for example, has to be pretty severe, because it just feels like less car, even if it can go as far.
Although, if it in California, it's pushed the price down now to under $13,000. That's actually cheaper than a Ford Fiesta. That's cheaper than a Chevy, than the little Chevy Sonic.
And if you could plug that thing into 120 volts at work, it's the perfect commuter car that will actually save a California commuter $300-$400 a month.
And time as well, because they'll get in the HOV lanes. But interestingly, the other thing about this is the Mitsubishi i-MiEV in the US until now has not had rapid charging as standard. It's now going to be standard. All these extra features are going to be standard. Heated seats at the front, heated battery. Now, it's still going to get about 60 to 65 miles of EPA approved range. Now, Jonathan, you and I have driven the British version of that car, which is different from the Japanese version of the car. The Japanese is the lightest and most efficient. The British European version is kind of in the middle, and the American one is the heaviest, and I presume the least efficient. So I know people in the UK who've managed to get 80 out of one. But what do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, on a nice warm summer's day, driven carefully, I think I've had 87 miles range indicated when I've unhooked it from its charge. I like the i-MiEV, the UK one, and the C0.
Yeah, and the Ion, of course,
great.
as well.
For what they are, little city cars, I think they're fantastic.
Now,
good value.
Obviously, the US version is slightly wider. It's just bigger, so it's
got ugly indicators on the front. The US version, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's different. And Mitsubishi must have spent a heck of a lot of money getting this car ready for the US, because they built it for the Japanese market to fit in with the K-class regulations. They then had to bring it to Europe. They then had to modify it, make the bumper bigger, make this bigger, make that bigger, improve this safety aspect, so it could be homologated in Europe. And then when they took it to the US, same thing again. They had to make it bigger, change the car, blah, 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 blah. So it's one of the few plug-in cars sold around the world that really is different. I'm talking about taking my Leaf to America in a couple of years' time. I could hopefully get it modified fairly easily for US safety standards. And that's the impression I'm getting from Nissan. That's one of the reasons why I went to talk to Nissan the other day. Everybody seems to think it's going to be fairly easy. But if it was a Mitsubishi, forget it, because it's just so different. Each continent has its own version. But it's going to be an interesting car. I think it's going to be an interesting one to see if people buy it. And I think it's going to sell really well to college kids and to, first-time drivers. I think it's going to be a great car.
For a car that started off as one of the most expensive EVs, it's, very good.
All right. Are electric cars losing their value, Jonathan? This is a story that came from the Telegraph this week. Marc, Chatterley, I know you read it and you got very upset with it.
I did.
Do you want to tell us about it?
So it's a story where someone, or the Telegraph, I guess, has looked into the residual prices of various cars, and the article was atrociously written, actually, and had some huge errors in it, sort of editorial errors, but having to read around them basically came to the conclusion that electric cars are losing their value a lot quicker than an equivalent internal combustion engine car. The biggest issue that I had with it is it totally ignored the fact that everyone in the UK is getting $5,000 off of these cars to start with. So the moment you rolled it off of the forecourt, not only do you get the normal depreciation that comes with it's now a secondhand car, but you'd lost that $5,000 as well. So it was a very, very skewed and selective report. And there's also the fact that these cars aren't 3 years old yet. So we don't really have the UK market where a lot of people lease their cars. You lease on a 3-year deal. The Leaf, which was the first really production car, isn't 3 years old yet.
Yep.
So there isn't really a second-hand market, or there is a second-hand market, but all of those 3-year leases haven't come to an end. So the second-hand market is still incredibly small compared to what it could be. So their data group is incredibly small.
Yes.
So they've got this one hold where there's a $5,000 difference in all the figures, and also a very small data set that makes it really dodgy.
The other thing is the Telegraph is very right wing.
The Tory
not
graph.
known for its support of EVs. And secondly,
I thought it was very interesting this week. I sold a Leaf to a gentleman in Southern Ireland. So it's not Northern Ireland, it's part of the UK, gone to Southern Ireland. And to get a second-hand Leaf on an 11 plate, so 2011 with 20,000 miles, he was looking at €18,000. And the reason he's come over to the UK, flew over, ferried it back, was that he was saving about €5,000 by buying a vehicle over here. And I think what Marc said is true. The whole government grant has had a knock-on effect on the residual values of these EVs.
I think it's also a case of the different technologies, because the buyers don't understand the technologies. The people selling the cars, as your testament to, Jonathan, one of the reasons why your business exists is because people, your average salesperson doesn't understand the car. But also, they're quoting things like the Twizy having poor value. The Twizy is a fun plaything. It's not a genuine, serious car. I've owned one. And I got rid of it because I didn't find it reliable and I didn't find it met my needs. And I think a lot of people have done the same thing. Now, the other thing to bear in mind, as you said, is the magic 3-year figure hasn't come up in the UK yet. But also, UK cars, for the first 3 years of their life, do not have to have a roadworthiness test. It is assumed that from the point of manufacture until the car turns 3 years old, it's still safe. It's only when the car turns 3 years old do they have to have the annual inspections of the car's braking and steering and, check for rust, etc., etc., and of course emissions, which EVs don't have to worry about. So that is the point at which cars do tend to lose a lot of their value. But this is the other thing. Leasing companies have been incredibly speculative about EVs. They have put such low residual predictions on EVs because they don't understand the technology. And I believe, Marc, this is what's been happening in the US as well, right?
Yeah, I think that it's clear that the values of a used Leaf, we can just check what they are. There are some, and there's going to be certainly a lot of used Leafs as they come off lease. And it'll be very interesting to see what effect that has on the market. I think people who initially bought the car as opposed to lease it, are taking a certain hit, both some because the Leaf is turning out to be a car that does demonstrably lose range. And and partially just because there are more and better alternatives out there that render the early Leafs less valuable. So, I think the used car market, if the value of the cars is quite low, there's a strong benefit in that a whole range of people who did not previously consider EVs at all now have to do some calculations that might lead them to get a plug-in car.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm seeing, definitely.
And the other...
I think it's worth noting that the motor trade in the UK, as a rule, is scared stiff of any type of anything different from the norm. I've sold LPG vehicles for a number of years, and dealers even today will look at an LPG vehicle and go, what on earth is that? That's too weird. And even a hybrids, I have a number of dealers who I meet occasionally, and they'll look at a Mark II generation Prius and say, well, where do you plug it in?
Yeah.
And it just boggles the mind that those in the motor trade still don't know what a hybrid is. So when it comes to electric vehicles, when they appear at auction and lease disposal sales, even the auctioneers will crack jokes like, you're going to need a long extension lead for that, lads, and there's just this whole feeling of an ignorance and tongue-in-cheek jokiness which knocks down the residual value. So it doesn't always start with the lease companies. It's often where they're disposed within the trade that depresses the value.
It's also, recently the Renault Fluence has come on the market, incredibly low prices because Renault has got rid of their press fleet. I found out this week I had about 60 cars and they got rid of most of them.
I bought one.
And you bought one. And the thing about the Renault Fluence is it was a car designed to be used in with Better Place in Israel. It was essentially designed for Better Place in Israel to work with battery swapping, super fast battery swapping, 10 minutes and you're on your way. I know Better Place said less, but I've actually gone through a battery swapping station, and let me tell you, it was about 10 minutes. And, without that, the car just has an onboard 3 kilowatt J1772 capability. You cannot fast charge it. You cannot charge it any quicker than 3.3 kilowatts.
Oh,
and people do not want a car that will charge that slowly when the Zoe's out, when the Leaf's out. And so those cars are coming down in price. And I think people look at those and then they go, oh, that car's not very good because it's electric. Then all electric cars can't be very good. So even that also brings the prices down. Mark, you were going to say something.
My final thing, I was just going to say that I dropped out for a second, so I don't know if this was mentioned, but the education problem is even bigger at the second-hand market. It's an exponential leap. People's expectation with all their gadgets that use batteries, after 3 years, batteries are dead in laptops. You have to keep them plugged in all the time. And that's most people's view on how rechargeable batteries work. Yeah. So they turn up to a secondhand dealer who's selling a secondhand car that's 3 years old, and instantly they think, well, my laptop battery only lasted a year and a half, so this is a better technology. So, after 3 years, it's probably just about to go. And they don't realize that it's got 7 years until it's officially classed as dead. And even then, it's 70% its capacity. People don't know these things, and the education problem's even greater. And if we haven't solved the education problem at the first sale, then education at the second sale is going to be a much later thing, unless you're a specialist, as what we're finding out today.
And as Jonathan has said, I've turned up at dealers before to look at a Prius when we were looking to buy a second-hand Prius, and the car, you turned it on and the hybrid battery was dead because they'd let it run flat, or the main battery was dead because they'd let it run flat. And they, just quite happily trotted out this jump starter to try and jumpstart the car in an ordinary way, and then we're pressing the button on and on and off and on and off and on and off and on and off because nothing was happening when the car was turning on and sitting there. All right, let's move to our finally story. You will either love this story or you will loathe it. This is something, Mark, that I could see at Burning Man at some point in the future, right? You've done Burning Man.
Yes, I have.
Am I right?
I'd love to see this at Burning Man, and I know Akmar. I mean, I've met him many years ago when I first had my think, and he was the unusual fellow in Palo Alto who had put plug-in charging stations in front of his home for people to use. And now here he's got the design on putting a Tesla into an extended microbus. It's a hotel on wheels with the kind of range he's going to be looking at, and if he can keep intact the fast charger, he is looking at the ultimate hippie home.
Yeah, now he's the guy behind Cafe Electric, which is well known with obviously the drag fans, really, really powerful controllers. He is an electronics genius. I think it's probably the best way of putting it, isn't he, Mark? It's undisputed.
Absolutely. Only Omar. I would love to see the demand for such a thing be so great that someone actually moves in this direction.
So he's going to take the front end, two Volkswagen microbuses, and essentially the first one will be chopped off just in front of the back axle, and the other one will be chopped off just behind the cab. So it turns into this double length camper, and then he's going to graft on a Tesla Model S drivetrain and battery pack. I think this is brilliant.
Fantastic.
I hope to see it drive down, because he's now in Portland, isn't he?
Yes, he is.
Yeah, so he's now in Portland. I hope to see him drive it down to Burning Man at some point in the future. There's your challenge. And that really is it for today's show. Thank you very much for joining me, Mark. It's good to see you again. What are you up to at the moment?
Likewise, Nikki, I'm working with Adopt a Charger to make sure that parks, state parks and national parks in California have charging stations, because they've been kind of ignored. And you can read what I'm writing at plugsandcars.blogspot.com.
Thank you very much, and doing great work with Plug in America as well. Jonathan, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Safe
Enjoyed it. Thank
trip to Orkney. When are you off?
Thank you. I go on Thursday, catch the early morning ferry. No, late afternoon Thursday ferry.
Fantastic. Well, here's my advice after going on the Orkney ferry. Make sure that you turn your car alarm off, because you get all the car alarms. They're sitting on the ferry.
That's right, I did that,
and it drives dog owners wild, as well as the dogs, because the dogs have to be up on the deck. They're not allowed inside. The dogs have to be up on deck or in cars. And actually, my poor little border collie, who's a bit neurotic, after coming back from Orkney, on the way out, he came up on deck, but on the way back, he stayed in the car. And although our car alarm was switched off, all the other car alarms were going crazy, and the boat's doing this, of course, because it's quite choppy up there. It's never calm seas up in Orkney. And the poor little lad now, whenever he hears a police siren, he thinks about running home. I've just about got him past that now. But there we go. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. I'm sorry this show ran a little bit longer than I'd said we were going to, but I think it was a very good one. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter. We are at Transport Evolved on Twitter. You can also go to our website every day for the latest in the EV world with news stories. We do about 4 to 5 a day. www.transportevolved.com. You can subscribe to this show on iTunes, search for Transport Evolved, and you get a choice. You can have the audio version of the show, or you can have the video version of the show. We have started video podcasting again. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us pretty much everywhere, probably at a charging station near you. That's it, folks. Thanks a lot. And as always, don't forget to plug in. See you soon. Take care. Bye.
Bye.